everybody. How's the audio coming through? Let me know if you can hear me on this thing. What's up, everyone? Good to see you all. I saw a lot of familiar faces in there. Let a few people filter in while we get started. Good to see you all. I had a few notes from the chat earlier. Somebody was asking. I actually made a joke to our good Canadian friend D.L. McD, who's a great stuntman, and we've known each other for 20 years. I said that I love his beer totem dance in Canada, and somebody was asking about drunken boxing, and I actually didn't even think about including drunken boxing because I never considered it having any kind of sacred origin. But when you look at the history of Aztec rituals, the Florentine Codex has a lot of good stuff on this. This is the raw kind of Nahuatl, kind of like the all the raw information about what they knew about the Aztecs in the what was it, the 16th century. They would make pulque for their ceremonies, and it was pretty intoxicating. But they didn't drink. You didn't drink pulque with dinner every night, right? You didn't just do that. They probably didn't drink liquor very often. In fact, it seems that most native societies didn't really drink much liquor in general. It seemed to be something of a luxury, and probably had a prohibition or a taboo associated with it. Probably for good reason. A lot of the time it was what the prohibitionists and the temperance movement was all about in the States, but we'll leave that aside. But anytime you have a large ingathering of grain, like if we just stick with the Aztecs, whenever they would bring in a huge amount of grain and corn and whatnot, they would make a bunch of this pulque because you just naturally had a big store of it, and it might not have been very efficient for you to do it otherwise, right? So it would be done during festivals, and so the drinking of liquor and getting intoxicated it sort of had a sort of ceremonial element to it, and people would definitely associate spirits with these drunken dances and all the revelry and whatnot, and they do a lot of crazy things. There would be saturnalias and whatnot. So I don't see why Chinese drunken boxing wouldn't have begun that way. I think it's pertinent because there's so many spirits associated with drunken boxing. All these gods of drunken boxing, right? The 8 gods of boxing, of drunken boxing from Drunken Master. And we have it in our own language. Liquor is a spirit, and maybe that's something that we could take a little bit more seriously and look back and say, hey, maybe drunken boxing actually has these shamanistic roots as well. And then again, over time, you might have a school. Like maybe there were groups that made the pulque, that made the rice wine. That white wine in China is no joke. If you drink too much of that, you end up a few days later. And so if you were to have like people that specialized in making the same kind of wine over and over and over, that might become a school. It might become a dance society, and then you might have people emulating those dances, perhaps. So anyway, I wanted to throw that in, and then there was one more note about Wing Chun. Also, one of the viewers mentioned that Wing Chun has some pretty effective sparring techniques, and I would say that that's definitely true today. And today, it's had about 100 years, ever since about 110 years since the beginning of the Chinese Revolution, essentially. And again, my argument is that if it's in the South, then it just didn't have. Like, it was going to be more raw because it was further from the capital. I know probably a lot of you didn't catch the entire episode because I do this on a premiere basis. So if you come in the middle of it, you just kind of start in the middle. But essentially, the hypothesis that I'm proposing is that the Southern styles, they have the edge in the certain kind of aesthetic and movement language that they do because they're further from the capital. And then the further north you go, the more aesthetic the more like pleasing to the eye, and the more sort of, or I guess like the less militaristic they look. It doesn't mean that they're less applicable. Maybe there's just more secrecy sort of like built into those movements, as you kind of see with, you know, Baksulam, for example, which is North Shaolin that went south. And a lot of those movements are, you know, they are these routines. Lance, thank you for giving me this information, but a lot of these, you know, sword and shield routines are done without a sword and a shield. So you can almost imagine that as being done in order to prepare yourself to do sword and shield combat without without tipping off the authorities that you're doing sword and shield combat, right? It would be the kind of idea. Okay, cool. First question we have is from Film Combat Syndicate. Mr. Lee Golden, thank you. All the archival footage off your YouTube and your own personal library. Yeah, I found all that stuff on YouTube. I admit I'm just kind of a YouTube archive. What would you say? Like I just sort of mine YouTube for archive videos, old, you know, tribal videos. It's really difficult to find. It's really difficult to find old footage of, you know, Aborigines, for example, in Australia. There's just not much of that. There are pictures, but by and large, not many people film that stuff. It's very well documented in text, but not a whole lot. You know, not a whole lot regarding, not a whole lot of footage of animal societies. So, so we can take some comments also if there aren't more questions right now. Yeah, Dario's asking what humanity did evolve the most was alcoholic beverages. I mean, that's kind of like the argument against prohibition. in America, prohibition was trying, you know, the attempt to outlaw alcohol, which at the time seemed like a pretty futile endeavor, because, you know, if you have a sack of grain and you throw it in your closet, and you heat it, you know, you let it get hot over the summer, it's going to turn into alcohol. I think we tried that once in high school. It didn't taste good, but it was definitely alcohol. And if you take like glutinous rice and you put it in a jar and you let it sit for a month, it becomes rice wine. You know, so it's really hard not to make alcohol. I mean, they probably had wine before they had grape juice, even, you know. And that, again, that's something where when you, without a doubt, it would have been ritualized. It would have been consumed at a festival. And I don't think that festivals were just times when people got together. These were new moon festivals, first fruits. These things mean a lot to people. You know, 100 years ago, these festivals meant everything to most of the world. Nowadays, we kind of forget them all, and we just sort of think of festivals as this is when people get together. Not, you know, without realizing why these festivals still happen during, you know, like the transition from like winter to spring, or spring to, or from summer to fall when you harvest. That stuff was really important because like those things united everybody, and it had to do with food, and in this case with alcohol also. And Daria's asking, I wonder how long has the Jewish religion had wine? For example, sacramental wines have been forever, I'd imagine. Yeah, anytime you have, although that's interesting because, you know, they were you know, a nomadic. They were a nomadic group for so long, and I wonder how that influences what kind of wines and what kind of drink people make. Jewish wines are also very sweet. Mogan David, this is a personal favorite of mine. It tastes like grape juice. You could probably drink a whole bottle and still feel relatively normal. So yeah, I don't know why. And like you know, ports are sweet, so. It's an interesting question. I think that if you, I think an anthropology of liquor would be so fascinating. Next to an anthropology of beards, I think it would be one of the most interesting anthropology studies possible. Avar Stunts saying, kind of unrelated, but what are your tips for aspiring stunt performers, stunt reels that have the work ethic and skill but lack on-set experience? Yeah, you're what you'll see a lot of the time is, you know, you get a lot of new up-and-coming stunt performers connecting with filmmaking stunt performers. Like Vlad Rimberg does a bunch of these, Manny Manzanares, and they'll shoot previs, right? And that previs is not previs for any movie. It's just sort of like a fake previs to sort of demonstrate, knowledge of the source material, right, or love of the material. So they might do like a Black Panther previs that has nothing to do with Black Panther. It's just, you're just kind of moving like Black Panther. So you could do previs like that. You could actually make material like that. It depends on what you want to approach with stunts also. If you're just going for performance, I mean, you should always be angling to do more than just perform, because you'll always start as just a pad wrangler anyway. But if the coordinator sees that you're also capable as a filmmaker, as a choreographer, as an editor, I mean, maybe you could. Some people go straight from YouTube to making previs on Black Panther. That happens, right? Because a lot of what's involved in becoming a Hollywood stuntman, and in Hong Kong as well, and Chinese and stuntman, is you have to be able to sort of mesh with the crew, and there's a culture that you're gonna have to mesh with. That's probably like 80% of this. Gotta be honest, like that's a huge part of it. And if you don't mesh with the crew, and some crews are great, and if you don't mesh with the crew though, then you might just not work on those movies. So demonstrating that you are a culture fit, however it takes to do that, it means going and meeting them a lot of the time, being face to face, going to gyms. That's the best I think that's the best advice I can give for that. Impossible is nothing. Do you have a bibliography of your sources for the Sacred Origins video? It's a good question. I'd be happy to provide one. I'm going to stick that in the notes. But my main bibliographic source was Totemism and Exogamy, and it was written by James Fraser, and he was writing in, I think it's written in 1910. It's a big volume. It's 2,200 pages, and it sort of makes you rethink how kinship works and how marriage works, because you realize coming out of that, and of course he's writing from the perspective of a 1910 British anthropologist who stays in Britain. He's classically trained in Latin and Greek, and so you're going to get all of the typical sort of biases that come with that. But what Fraser does have is he does have this real desire to understand his subjects, and he was also very unbiased when it came to religion, because he was very critical of the Anglican Church. He was very critical of the church where he was at, and that actually gives him kind of like a very open perspective when it comes to talking about native societies. So that's a great one. And if I think of any more, I mean, of course there's a lot of Chinese books about Chinese anthropology, Chinese martial arts. Some of them are very mythical, like the Shaolin Grandmaster's text it tells the very mythical origins of animal styles. And when I say mythical, I mean it as in, so you can have a myth that's very scientific, that seems very reasonable, and a myth, and I believe that a myth, for example, is that the southern styles have small movements because of wooded areas and fighting on boats. I just don't think that that's enough to make a style look the way that it does, especially across all southern styles, right? I think that much more likely the main influence on martial arts systems is going to be the presence of real violence as a threat. And the real violence as a threat was from the north, always, right? Aside from like the Mongols who came from the east, but the threat was from the north. That was where the Manchurians came from. That's where the capital was established. So if you look at movement aesthetics that way, and I think that again you're just going to have you're going to have a much tighter feedback loop between a martial art aesthetic and the source of real violence. The closer you get to the source of real violence, well, one of two things is going to happen, right? Like if you have a military state over here, and communications and travel is not that good. Let's say we're talking about like 16th to 1600s and 1900s, like Ming transitioning to Qing dynasty, And it wasn't that easy to get from Beijing down to the south, right? It got a little bit easier over time. The Qing became a little bit more of a threat than the Ming didn't really care, but before the Ming you had the Yuan. They cared to some extent. And if you're isolated like that, then you don't really need to worry about what you look like as a martial arts system. You don't have to worry about it looking like you're a threat, right? Now, if you have a dynasty that doesn't care, right? If you have a dynasty that basically says, hey, you guys can have guns or weapons, whatever it is, go ahead and practice, it's your right, just don't go crazy with it, then you're going to get a lot of stuff like gun clubs in America. There are all these gun clubs that have cropped up, especially after 2001, where you have, and they're like tactical gun clubs. They're guys that, and women that get together and they practice shooting tactically. And they don't really get shut down very often, you know? Because they seem to be very well contained. There's a big paper trail, and the government seems to not be too concerned about this, right? But if the government started cracking down on, let's say, gun clubs on the East Coast, tactical gun clubs on the East Coast, the East Coast gun clubs would either shut down or they would sort of change their tone, right? And on the West Coast, they might be a little bit slower to respond, but nowadays they would probably respond pretty quickly. And that's why I think that when you look more at the aesthetics of a martial arts system, you have to take more into consideration where the real seat of authority and like the source of violence is really coming from. Otherwise, you could say anything, right? Like you could make an argument that the Southern styles are the way that they look because like people are shorter in the South or something, or like you could say that it's because of the food that they eat. You can make all these like generalizations that I think are just, it's going to be really hard to justify those because there are just too many. There are too many counterexamples. John Trey, I never asked you how you pronounce your name. I apologize, John Truey. I'm sorry, man. Where even does this weird myth and culture come from, and how do you think that relates to the material you cover in this video? So I think that a big Trey. Hey, I got it the first time. Great. I think that like a big part of this is the introduction of firearms in China, which was sped up during European conquest in the starting from the Opium War, and it really blew up with the Boxer Rebellion. And I think that the common theme with all of this is that firearms they tend to like demystify very quickly. There's a lot of magical systems and witchcraft and whatnot that you'll see, whether it's in Africa or Europe or wherever. The magical systems sort of like change really quickly with the introduction of firearms. So here's an interesting example is werewolf myths. I think in Europe, werewolf myths seem to correspond with this introduction of firearms. So before the introduction of firearms, you have a lot of witchcraft, accusations of witchcraft that like people believe. And what, essentially, and the entire world had these, by the way, like nothing is new. This was not anything new. The Azande were doing witchcraft trials into the late 1800s. And when you have a system like witchcraft, you can essentially lay the blame on somebody, like an old woman who has nobody to back her up, or an old man, or whatever it might be, and blame them for a bad harvest. And if they have no one to back them up, then like maybe you can kick that person out of town, make them pay money, or kill them, right? And killing a witch was not very common, but it did happen. And and so because of that, like you didn't really, there wasn't really like an evidence-based system back then, because witchcraft, that was the evidence, right? And you could use some kind of oracle to divine who is, like you cut open a sheep's liver and read the lines or whatever. Like whatever it was, they would find some way to figure out who was at fault for this thing, right? And it was usually a priest or a priestess who had some kind of financial interest in finding a scapegoat in order to keep, the income rolling from the king, essentially. Okay, then firearms come into play. So let's say, before firearms come in, let's say that you have a big problem with cattle getting torn apart at night by wolves, right? Now we know that it's wolves, but at the time somebody says, I think it's a witch. There's a witch and she's turning into some kind of like cat, and let's go find the witch. And they find the witch, and they say that they find cat hair on her pillow and they go and kill her, right? Okay, well now that you have firearms, as a farmer, you sort of can't really make this excuse, because you're expected now, if you have firearms, to be able to shoot this wolf or this witch. And then what happened was that, when they started actually catching these wolves, killing their cattle, they would shoot the wolf and they wouldn't be able to produce a human witch anymore. Instead, what they would try and do is say, okay, well, if the wolf ran away, for example, they would try and pin the blame on not a witch, but a werewolf who had to have the same injury that they inflicted on the wolf. So there's this like additional level, like a slight amount of logic that's inserted into the evidence process. And over time, like, the werewolf myth obviously goes away, because nobody can ever actually produce a werewolf, and plus you have to shoot it with a silver bullet, and nobody's going to use a silver bullet, so it sort of like negates itself. But it sort of shows that time period when firearms were rapidly changing how courts worked at the time, because courts at the time had gone through a lot of different iterations, and firearms were sort of like this no-nonsense way to basically determine, like, there's no witch, there's no werewolf, like, you shot, it was a wolf, man, like, the thing that you shot is a wolf. And I think that kind of transition is what happened in China. I think that's what sort of falsifies a lot of martial art claims to Iron Shirt and whatnot, and a lot of the mysticism gets like drained out very quickly once you introduce firearms. And without a doubt too, you're gonna have the same thing wherever you go. So that's what I would say is the source of it, is with firearms. I think it's a huge part of it, and I think that's the implications of firearms. And then nukes sort of bring in a new kind of myth due to nukes, because it's like a worldwide firearm now. Right, so every story, every myth is global now. Things used to be more personal. After the Cold War especially, everything's global now, because that is the source of power. So that, again, that affects everybody. That's sort of like the intent load that everybody's taking, whether they're in politics or not. Like, you kind of know that somebody's got a bomb that can blow up your entire city. And that affects you. And it'll affect your aesthetic. It'll affect how you move. Jurds or Yurds, depending on how you pronounce it. What's in the works for you now, Mr. Jake? Upcoming films or YouTube vids? I'm really enjoying these action essays. I'm pushing through to get one more done for the Hong Kong and Chinese style, which is it's going to have opera and triads. Not just triads, but secret societies, right? Not just criminal. Like, these are just secret societies like Elks Lodges, right? If you're familiar with those in the States. And then, and at the end of that, it's going to have a conclusion, and I have a family tree I'm going to make about where the Hong Kong and Chinese style comes from, and all those kind of different spots that it comes from. Then I want to move on to American, then Japanese, which are going to be probably, the American one's also going to be this big because it's huge. Japanese one can be a little bit smaller because I've kind of gotten a lot of the language out of the way, and then I'm going to start crafting that into like the movement language hypothesis. That's like the big arc of the movement language. We have a feature that is still in pre-production, Violent Rhythm, which is a action comedy musical, martial art film, and we're going to be doing that at our studio. And we've hired a bunch of people now, so we can execute that much more easily than before. Tomaz, by the way, what was the clip of the large fella doing the wide kung fu clothesline on the bum fights scenario bit? Wide kung fu clotheslines. Don't know. You have to give me a time code on that one. Next question. I'm from another person, 81. I admire the time and knowledge you put into this. How do you find the time to practice, train around your work? I assume you're busy with projects as well. How's your body holding up? My main injury right now is my neck, so I'm always careful about doing reactions when I'm doing motion capture. I have a studio that I co-founded here in Las Vegas called Super Alloy, and our main job is motion capture for games, particularly game combat, which in terms of like physical intensity is more intense than making indie action films. So I have to stay in shape, but I don't really work out that much because I'm also trying not to be injured because I'm 41, and am I 41? I'm gonna be 41 soon. And so I tend to just work out like 3 times a week, about 20 minutes at a time. And anytime I snack, I force myself to do some kind of like weight, body weight exercises to fail. Keep in mind too that most injuries happen during training. So that has definitely been the case for me. I've seen almost all my injuries have been during training, so I'm very careful about training. I'm careful about learning new stuff. I take things very slowly. No matter what age you are, you're not invincible. You should take things very slowly if you want to remain uninjured, because if you're injured, you're not really working. Unless you have a job that allows you to work from a chair. If you're a previs guy, then great. Then breaking your leg might not be a big deal. If you're a performer, then just be careful. Be really careful. Just do stuff that's going to give you the benefits of training, but without the potential for injury. And don't show off to people on the street. Please do not show off, because people die doing that. All right. And as a counterpoint, same question, same person. Isn't savate a fairly recent style? Origin story about sailors fighting on boats, which led to the capoeira-esque roundhouses, which used. So this is an interesting theory. Isaac Florentine said that savate was the original kicking style that came to Okinawa. The question is, where did the French pick this up? I don't think that the French would have invented a kicking style like savate. I think that they picked it up in Southeast Asia, because they were doing. Keep in mind they were going all around the world. They were trading in America. They were trading in Vietnam, Annam at the time, Ceylon. Like, they were all over the place, and so without a doubt they would have picked up some of these things along the way, for who knows what reasons exactly. But yes, I think savate is at the origin of much of Okinawan karate, which then turns into Taekwondo and Hapkido. But no, I don't think that the French invented it from scratch. And there's this really interesting sport in Southeast Asia called takraw, which is volleyball with your feet, and that would be an interesting history to unravel and figure out where that came from. Because old games like that with balls and stuff, like they take a pig's bladder and inflate it, and they kick this thing around, or and it was these jumping games. A lot of the time were during harvests, so that you would jump, or you'd go on a swing. This is where swings come from. You'd swing in order to make the grain go up. More magic. So maybe takraw comes from that, because like takraw, the jumping in takraw is phenomenal. So they might have gotten it from them. Yurds, would you consider researching and essaying adjacent to martial arts? Would you consider researching and essaying adjacent to martial arts? I think that if you want to have a clear head nowadays, you should be spending a lot of time reading old stuff, because it's all available and it's all free. Now, I have a bunch of books behind me. Each book over there costs between $8 and $12. Even an old book, like I can get old books. These are so old, and they're like $15, $20 if you want to just have the full book experience. If you don't want to pay any money, go to archive.org and just read it for free. Or download the PDF and read it on your phone, whatever. The reason I say that is because there's so much mass media, and it's all kind of the same stuff. It's the same story, essentially. Like, superhero stories all kind of tell the same story. You can be a leader, you can be anything, and it's like, okay, this is today's message. Let's read. But if you read messages from 100 years ago, it's very different, right? If you read a message from 1920, it was about like, hey, you gotta be a farmer, get your crops up and provide for the community, right? It was a very different message. The way that people collected information, the way that people interacted with one another was very different. And yes, of course there are biases, but just read between the lines. Like, see how people thought back then. Look at the way that they also kind of understood. They when you read older martial art books, for example, when you read an older martial art book, you're going to see that the author has a better understanding of the old version of the style than a new author would. So anytime you're reading a history book, try and get an old history book first. Read the old history. Okay, and like 19 very readable stuff starts in 1890. Like that's a very readable material. Then you're actually gonna be able to understand stuff from like longer ago, and you'll see that people were they might have been noticing a transition happening, a transition from sacred martial arts to firearms, for example, and they will see that and they'll report on it, and then that stuff is sort of glossed over later on. So if you get a new history book, they might not even mention that transition. They may not even really talk about the old system. So for example, like this is a good book. It's this is Fairbanks' book on China. It's good, but this is what is it? It's 500 pages or so. He starts talking about. So where do we go here? This is okay. At page 143 of 500, he starts talking about the Qing dynasty. So the first 140 pages are from 2500 BC to 1600. And it's just not enough time dedicated to it, because a new history book is going to be much more concerned with, again, late imperial China, nationalist government, and the PRC. That's going to be the main focus of a new history book. But if you read a book that was written before the PRC, before the CCP, the Communist Party, then you're going to get a much fuller view of old history. And the same would apply to martial arts. So yes, people should read books. They should read old books. Watch less Netflix. Watch less streaming. And read books. Spend hours reading books. And when you read more books, it makes it easier for you to read more books. It becomes a skill. Patrick Nan, were you able to watch the documentary Kung Fu Stuntman for your next issue on Chinese opera? Yeah, I watched that documentary. It's a great documentary. I think that documentary, there are two things that I pulled away from that doc. Well, there's more than that, but two main things that come to mind. The first one is that there's a shape to Hong Kong action cinema in the 80s. And that shape sort of is, I think it's best embodied by Chin Carlock. Because the way that guy fell, the way that the Hong Kong stuntman could fall and sort of look like they had no control midair, that was a shape. And it sort of defined an entire era. And it really defined those stunt guys. Like, so those stunt guys were good at fighting, but the guys that really did well were the guys who could fall and do stunts. Jackie's fighting's great, but I think as a martial artist, he's not as good as Sammo. But his stunts and the way that his body would shape during his stunt, that is a shape. That's a silhouette. That's like a movement language. And I think Chin Carlock is sort of the epitome of that. And it's no wonder why he's sort of the head of the Hong Kong Stuntman's Association now, because he's the best faller in history. That's the first thing I noticed. Second thing was, you remember Xiao Ho, the Mad Monkey Kung Fu star, incredible performer, northern stylist, I think. And he was with Lau Gaoliang for years, doing Mad Monkey Kung Fu, My Young Auntie, and he did smaller films too. Like he was also in, I think he was in Legendary Weapons also, and just phenomenal star, great lead. And then after Shaw Brothers sort of shuts down most of their martial arts cinema, Xiao Ho moves over to working with Sammo. And then later on with Yuen Woo-ping, you see him in Iron Monkey. And he really is like not really a big presence anymore. And it makes me wonder if there was sort of like some politics there when you're changing teams. And who knows why he changed teams. Like maybe he changed teams for other reasons. I have no idea. Maybe it was differences with Lau Gaoliang. I don't know. But when you change teams over to Sammo, you tell me one good Xiao Ho fight in a Sammo Hung movie. It's just not many. I mean, he's in Pedicab Driver. You blink and you miss him. And he's probably his biggest fight is an Iron Monkey, and then after that he's not really doing much else. So there's this sort of reality to stunts, and it's not just Hong Kong. Every stunt business is like this, and it's for a good reason. It's because the people that you work with, they know how you move and they're not going to hurt you. And that's key when you're doing stunts, is to make sure that you get performers who are hardworking and aren't going to hurt you. And then talent sort of comes third. Talent's sort of wrapped into that, but I mean, if you were to pick between a high-flying tricker who can't control himself, well, a high-flying tricker who isn't really on the same page as the team, timing-wise, and then a guy who's just really good at falls and good at distancing and timing, they're going to go for the second guy every time. And also, if it's a choice between an extremely talented person who's always late and sort of like a guy who is always on time and wants to work, they're going to pick the second guy. So, and that's just the reality of stunts. And so I think that's why, like, sometimes in Hong Kong movies, you keep seeing the same guy in all these movies. Like Peter Chan, for example, is one of my favorites. He's the villain in Spooky Encounters, and he was the duck martial artist in Kung Fu Genius. And I think he's so great, probably because he just was a really good worker. He probably showed up on time. So that's a great documentary. I don't know exactly what else I would take from it for the next action essay, though. They don't really get much into the opera, which they had. They don't get much into the secret societies also, probably because they can't. But those are huge, huge influences. And so I'm happy to talk about them because I don't think I'm going to get in trouble. Impossible is nothing. Sorry if this question seems weird. Do you feel that practicing Kung Fu Wushu is inherently practicing any root shamanism? Asking because you're raised Christian. Yeah, well, this is a good question. It's something I ask myself. Anybody who's got a spiritual bone in their body might be asking themselves the same thing, where if you're doing the aesthetics of an old ritualistic movement system, are you sort of like embedding yourself in a spirituality without knowing it? I think it's possible. I think it's also possible that you can separate the aesthetics from the spirituality and just maintain the aesthetics, but as long as you're aware of what the aesthetics are, that sort of allows you to avoid being spirited by them. And you know, the other thing too about a lot of these martial arts systems is that I can see this a lot in karate and taekwondo, and we will do these self-defense techniques where, you know, someone will say, like, hold up, okay, so punch me, and the guy will throw a punch, just hold the punch there, right? And the master will do some kind of trapping technique. And that is also a sort of form of ritualism, because you're sort of inducting yourself into this society of people who trust a martial art master, so that, like, if the martial art master tells you to just throw a punch and hold it out, you'll do it. That to you means punch now. So spirituality takes a lot of forms, and it creeps in weird places, you know. And so it's certainly possible. I don't have all the answers, but I think with Wushu, you're probably pretty far from it. Although there's this aspect of Wushu, which is like the fast head turn movement. And you see it just, like, even with stunt performers who are just trained in Wushu. And, you know, let's say a director tells a Wushu performer, okay, in this shot, you're not fighting, you're just going to look down at the phone and pick it up. And they say, action. The Wushu performer goes, and then they do it like that. Well, like, that's sort of like, you sort of like ritualize the movement to the point where you can't just look down at something and go, like, you can't do that anymore, right? So that's something, and like, where does that come from? And I think that a lot of Wushu just comes from, again, a lot of it is just deference to the state, and a lot of it is very disciplinary, right? It's like ballet. A lot of ballet movement is disciplinary. It's for the sake of demonstrating discipline. Gymnastics, same thing. There's a certain kind of run in gymnastics that, you know, is conducive to doing a correct movement, but that movement has to have a certain aesthetic in order to show that you're disciplined, right? That might affect your run. Maybe you're not going to be able to run very well if you take gymnastics. Cross-train. That might be the answer. I hope that answers your question, because I don't quite have an answer. Bruno B02, do you have a favorite martial art? I think my favorite martial art to look at, I don't know, man, like, it's hard to beat Samo's Wing Chun. I think that Samo's Wing Chun choreography is still like might be the best thing to look at. Jackie's Drunken also is great. In terms of like real life looking at martial arts, I don't know. I don't know. Kind of like capoeira too. No, I don't have a favorite. Let's see. Yurit's asking about archery, which has many styles, cultures, and histories. Would you consider doing a vid series on traditional weapons? I don't know anything about archery, but just in general though, yeah, I don't know. I think a more interesting parallel between with weapons would be like the parallel between weapons and music, and how archery and stringed instruments sort of like how those align in societies. I think that'd be more interesting because you have like some really amazing music within warrior societies. Why is that? Because a lot of their weapons had sort of like musical qualities to them. And then sometimes those instruments would then be used to drum up support for the war, and then there's this kind of feedback loop. Tomas, Eric, have you looked at the curious case of Baji Chuan's popularity in media representation? Baji Chuan. It's fairly ignored in Mainland and Hong Kong, but it's the way to portray Kung Fu as a whole in Japan. No, I have not. I don't even really know what Baji Chuan is, to be honest. Not very familiar with it, sorry. Okay, let's see. Oh, there's a compliment in here. Let's see, we have Allah Marinel. Just want to throw a compliment out there. Been a fan since high school. Love your work and I love your videos. You're the closest we've had to someone who can move and choreograph like Jackie. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And what you'll see in the American episode is that actually bit me in the butt. Being able to do the Hong Kong movement style became a hindrance because again, when you train yourself to do a fight that's more cooperative and more aesthetic with another performer, and then you're asked to do an American motion capture game like God of War, the two languages are very different. And they called me out immediately. They're like, "Man, that's not Kratos." And I was like, "Well, what is Kratos?" Because in the Hong Kong style of movement, you are thinking character and story, but you also are considering the other person. So you have two people, and you have a character, but your character is also sort of contingent upon how this person moves. Like the two of them can't just have their own plans in Hong Kong style choreography. Like you have to plan together. So you plan the fight together, and then you sort of like rewind the tape and say, like, okay, now I'm going to perform that as the character. But the cooperation came first, right? Even though that cooperation is influenced by the character, I guess you could say that there's like more of a feedback loop between performer, cooperation, performer, or a character cooperation. There's a little bit more of like a free flow between those things. In an American style, it's much more character and then action, and like let this guy react, but there's not as much cooperation. And that was an entirely new way of moving that I wasn't used to. And what happens when you are so trained in the Hong Kong style is that when there's downtime or if there's an uncertainty, you don't really know what to do with yourself. Like you lose character very quickly, or you'll just kind of go back into rote movement. You'll go back in. You'll sort of like complete the movement set, even though that person has stopped. You might continue doing it. It might take you like 2 or 3 moves to stop, and then the question is, okay, well, if you're really that character, would you have done that stuff, right? Is that in the character to be performing moves in midair, right? So that's, and you see even Jackie do it, and I showed that in the previous episode. That that's just like the natural tendency when you're doing the Hong Kong style is you're just thinking ahead like 6, 7, 8 moves. And when the other person stops and when the other person messes up, you are not, like for a moment, you're not really in character. Like you're just cooperating and you're just sort of doing the rote movement. It makes a beautiful aesthetic, but again, it's like there is a cost and benefit to all this. We have L.A. Hey, Eric, you mentioned being 41. Does this mean you're done performing? Also, I was curious to know if you're referring to yourself fitting in that Hollywood stunt world. No, I'm not done performing. I hope I'm not done performing. I'm very careful about reactions and falls now. But I've been performing pretty nonstop for the past 4 years at this company. And I still want to keep doing our own films and doing motion capture films, and at some point doing live action again. We'll see. And but the second question there was curious if you're referring to yourself. Yeah, I didn't really fit very well in the Hollywood system, and I'll admit that. I think that maybe a lot of people in the indie world will find it hard to fit in there, because in the indie world, it's just very different, right? Because you're not really concerned about, well, you don't have money. You aren't really concerned so much about schedule. The hierarchy is pretty loose. But then when you go into the world of Hollywood, where there's necessarily a hierarchy, otherwise money just sort of gets sapped away. Like, how well can you fit in that hierarchy? And I tried. There was also a part of me that where I just wanted to keep working at my technique, and I think it would have been more difficult for me to do that in Hollywood. And so yeah, part of it's my own experience, but I think that experience is shared by a lot of people. I think a lot of those people also end up doing previs a lot of the time, because they take their skills as an indie filmmaker plus stunts, and then that becomes a commodity within a stunt crew. So that's that's a great way to fit in. And that was what I ended up doing when I did, my biggest stunt jobs were previs jobs. So, and then there's also the motion capture stunt world, which has its own, I guess it kind of has a community. But a lot of the motion capture stunt world, they're also in voice acting, and they're also actors, and they tend not to be away on these long Marvel jobs. So it's, yeah. So there you go. Do you have, let's see, another person, anyone, do you have one martial art you wish you had time to study now? I would love to study boxing. I just would like to be able to be better at boxing. Just better at hands in general. That would be... And honestly, now, like, after doing all this, I would love to do more traditional kung fu. That would be fun. I've sort of toyed with the idea, talking with Lance, who's in the action essay, talking about, like, trying to find a way to, do some cross training with kung, just to give me, just to cross train a little bit, and push myself to do different shapes, and experiment with a different action language. So yeah, that's one. All right, John Trey, is the action musical going to be motion capture animation? Yes, entirely. We'll do it all in motion capture. That's the plan anyway, and that also allows us to, if we want to get a voice actor who's a comedian who can't move very well, but just wants to do a really good voiceover track, then we can hire anyone we want. So, and then I can also hire, a violinist to mocap the actual violin scenes, and then, Phil, who works with us now, he's sitting right over here. Here, say hi, Phil.
G'day.
So Phil's here full time with us, and also an action designer and a musician, and Phil can pick up a violin, learn it, fake it, do a fight scene with it. So I'll perform with someone else in the movie. Pete says, "I can see you doing Choi Li Foot." Why? Why me doing Choi Li Foot? You think so? Maybe. I don't know if I can push myself to be that long. Maybe I could. It might be good for me, actually. Let's see. DL. When you're putting together your fights on both yours or someone else's moves, do you do a full fight and then decide camera placement, or in the process of choreo, do you have your angles in mind? Right. Yeah, good question. I bet we all kind of have different answers to this, because a lot of us do this. But I think maybe we all start from different spots. I tend to think in tempo. I'm very I think very musically. So I tend to think in like editing cadence and rhythm and how the sound effects are going to play out. And I actually I start to back out from that. So I sort of figure out like a shot cadence, and I hear the sounds, and I sort of like back out and figure out what moves would fit that, which is going to bite me in the butt if it doesn't fit the characters. So I am always then checking that against the characters. That was like, at least that's how I always thought about it from a Hong Kong perspective. I think now that I've done more American style movement, I think more in terms of act and more in terms of character now. So I'll think more in terms of like, what's a cool combo? How can we deliver this combo in a very interesting way, and how can we showcase the character using this combo? And then figure out the reaction to it, and maybe a breaking point where then like the second character can then do their combo. Okay, let's figure out that combo now. So it's a little bit more American style that way. But my old way of doing it was definitely like, I thought the edit, the sound, and then I'd back out to camera and I'd fit all that in with the actors and performers and figure out movements. And those movements wouldn't make sense a lot of the time, but it never mattered. And I knew that because I was always thinking kind of backwards, right? It was anytime I found myself falling into going the other way, where we've all done this, right? Like two stunt performers, we stand there. Okay, so I throw a punch. It's like whenever I started there, I never came up with anything. It was always kind of like really generic choreography. But if I started from the edit and worked backwards and filled in movements to kind of fit the cadence, it allowed me to be more aesthetic and more like, I don't know, like freed me from any kind of application. Because if you're starting from two guys standing there, okay, you throw a punch, I'm going to block it. Okay, then I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this trap, and I'm going to punch you here. Then it turns into mirror application, and which is a different fight, but it's not the Hong Kong style. I think it's very difficult to make a Hong Kong style that way. Although I'd be curious to know how like Samo and Jackie and Yu Ping and those guys, how they think of combat, because I'm guessing they think of it more operatically, right? They're thinking of it like dun 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 dun. They kind of back out from that because there's such a close overlap between opera and the Hong Kong style, which I will get into next episode. Thomas, what would you say are some of the best old school mainland action movies? I've seen Mirage, but I don't know it would be considered as pure mainland as it has a Hong Kong director. Yeah, I mean, even Shaolin Temple, I think, had a Hong Kong director, the first two. And then the third one, Martial Arts of Shaolin. I think Martial Arts of Shaolin is the best one with Jet Li. Like, I don't know if it gets any better than that. South Shaolin Master is another good one. And I don't know if that one's... I think that that's a mainland director. But in terms of, like, pure mainland, Xiaolong. This guy looks like... Yeah, no, I think that this guy's also Hong Kong. So even the director of South Shaolin Master, I think it was Hong Kong. Oh yeah, Brandy Ewan. Wait, no, Brand Ewan Bo? Who's this? I don't know who that is. And Yung Hua, Hong Kong guy. Yeah, Hong Kong team it seems. But South Shaolin Masters is a really good one. Great rope dart fight at the end, really cool. But pure mainland movie, I mean, it's gonna be like wushu sets a lot of the time, I think. And Hong Kong choreographers probably were able to kind of like tease those apart and like remake them so that they're more Hong Kong style rather than like purely wushu sets. Outrigger. Will we all see AI used to create action choreography? I got a funny idea about that, but I don't want to give it away. But yeah, I think that's possible. Oh yeah, Pete mentioned The Final Master. Yeah, it's a great mainland movie. It's 2011. The guy did another one called The Archer. I can't remember the name of it exactly. Didn't think the action was quite as good as in that one. There's a little bit of egg on some of the performers, but like also very interesting the way that he approaches action. Not very cooperative. Judge Archer. John's gonna kill me. Interesting, very interesting approach to. Xu Haofeng. Yeah, he's got an interesting approach to action because he takes strange weapons and sort of tries to figure out like what is a realistic way to use this weapon, and then that becomes the choreography, right? Instead of going backwards from the kind of Hong Kong style. John Trey, will all the animation at every level be done in-house by you guys? Don't know if we'll do all of it. We'll definitely do the majority of it, probably because we're just going to be doing it in our free time. We're putting it into project management software now so that we can actually get this thing up and going and start shooting it. We want to shoot the first scene, which is inspired by a grocery store robbery that I walked into at one point. So that'll be fun. Yeah, Pete's mentioning this martial artist turned novelist, turned screenwriter, turned director, choreographer. Yeah, so it's an interesting combo. I don't think Nikki Lee is Mainland, is he? Is Nikki Lee a Mainland choreographer? I think he's kind of generic. Yeah, Gadali's a Choi Foot guy. Yeah, you showed me, man. It looks good when you do it. So I don't know. I thought if you want, oh, here's another one. Do you think Corey Yoon's approach is more directed towards opera? I was watching The Legend, and Corey's style seems to linger in the performance, while I think Yuen Ping seems more combative. Yeah, Corey's style is it's also very, like, there's a whole crew of those guys, like Samo, Corey Yoon, Meng Hoi, and then all the people that they ran with, like Billy Chan was always in like the good stuff. Billy Chan Woong Ai, who you don't really like see him perform very much, but always behind the scenes he was like instrumental in a lot of these big like great action Hong Kong films. So there was this whole crew, like Hong Gaban, like Sammo Hung's stunt team. Yun Bu obviously was in there. Lim Ching Ying was in there, and Xiao Ho a lot of the time was in there too. And so Samo, Corey Yoon, and Meng Hoi, they all kind of have a similar cadence to their shooting style. And I kind of focus more on the filmmaking, I think, with this stuff. But they sort of start like the Righting Wrong style, right? Where like you have a long opener, like you have like a sequence of fighting, right? And you'll have a few of these with a few breaks in between, and the breaks are where you hear the music for a second, right? And so you'll start it off with like an opening shot, an opening statement with an opening phrase that's like 8 to 10 moves, and that's one shot. And then it'll cut in cut into another sequence, which might be like 3 or 4 moves, and then a quick shot, and then maybe like a finisher with an impact. And they all kind of like tend to follow that same pattern because it works really well. It's a nice flow. Jackie, not so much that style. Like Jackie was always just kind of playing on camera. I love it. I love that John and Danny and Peter in this chat right now, because they can back me up and give more details. But it always seemed like Jackie was less concerned with Jackie rarely ever pushed in for a close up on a punch. Right? If that happens in a Jackie movie, that's Samo directing. Jackie always had a very different kind of MO when it came to action design. And so the way that he imagines stuff is, just how do I play? How do I play with this thing and make a really interesting full body movement? But in terms of the... and then Yuen Ping also had a similar cadence. So you said that Yuen Ping is more about conflict. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like Yuen Ping, a lot of his... I mean, he's like Beijing Wuxi. He's like Beijing Opera in Hong Kong. Like he is definitely in the lineage of Beijing Opera. His father was from Beijing, and Yuen Ping grew up with all of his brothers in Guangzhou, with like that theater, with like the theater there, and then he went into Hong Kong and like killed it, and like got into Beijing Opera in Hong Kong, as all these other Hong Kong guys did too. But like their fathers, as far as I know, were not like opera performers, right? And so Yuen Ping's entire career is like finding a muse to do these sort of operatic films. Like he's trying to get his headliner in a big film, right? Starting with you've got Jackie Chan, Yuen Bu, Sammo Hung, Donnie Yen, Jet Li, big stars, and you just direct them and try and do these very operatic films. So I think that a lot of Yuen Ping's aesthetic is is trying to tell that story with bodies, whereas Sammo, Corey, Meng Hoi, the Seven Fortunes style guys, they were trying to tell the story through editing and shooting. I think they were much more willing to do that. Corey Yoon especially, like he would really try and just tell the story with close shots and edits, and that's a lot of the time that's like a very practical way to get it done, especially when you have, he's working with action stars from America like Cynthia Rothrock, and like who could make Cynthia Rothrock look that good except Corey Yoon? Like, I mean, she's fantastic, obviously, but it was under him that she looked like that. And a lot of that, I think, is like, smart choreo, smart shooting, knowing exactly what their performers' skills are, and just being able to work with that, and being very, very pragmatic. Thomas, are you going to go into the whole wire bits at some point for Hong Kong China movement, starting with King Hui? Yeah, it's an interesting question. I suppose it definitely belongs in the operatic part. Because there is like a movement language associated with that, but I don't want to get too technical into wire work because I'm trying to just stick to movement, right? So if wire work affects movement, then yes. But if it's not about the movement, I don't really want to cover it, because it'd be interesting to compare wire work with like Japan and America. Japan didn't really do wire work as far as I know before Hong Kong, and then after Hong Kong they kind of do Hong Kong style wire work, but America did do a lot of rigging before Hong Kong. But again, the Hong Kong style rigging that came into the US like totally revolutionized rigging in America. Even though we had great riggers, we weren't really like playing the way that the Hong Kong guys were playing, and so their introduction of wire work really, that's why you have Buffy. Right. That's why you have superhero movies the way that you have them now. So it revolutionized superhero movies for sure. I don't know if we would have done that. Like we might have instead, if the Hong Kong wave hadn't happened, superhero movies might look more like Bourne movies. They might look more like Batman Begins, which is sort of at that like transition point. He wasn't really doing that wire stuff. He was doing much more of the Bourne Identity stuff. So. Let's see. A few other notes up here. LA is saying, I guess the reason why I made that comparison was due to watching Iron Monkey, and then watching The Legend of Iron Monkey seemed combative. Maybe that was just the film. Yeah, overall though, Yimou Ping is very, like he's very prop based. It's very beautiful. I think that the combativeness is going to depend upon the choreographer, depend upon the performer that he has. Like Donnie Yen's stuff is always combative because Donnie Yen was trying to be more combative. Jet Li probably a lot less. So there's always going to be some influence there from your star, especially when you have a star like Donnie who has like an idea of how the action should play out. And it seemed like maybe Donnie was a little bit out of sync with Yimou Ping a lot of the time, and which made their action great, in my opinion. Whereas Jet Li, Beijing, right? Beijing wushu guy working with a Beijing opera guy. He probably thought that Donnie Yen was going to be like Jet because, again, Donnie Yen is a Beijing wushu trained guy, but from America, from Boston. And Yimou Ping might have, been surprised when Donnie Yen starts trying to introduce boxing and taekwondo and tactical moves. Didn't quite fit the operatic mode that Yimou Ping was going for. Okay, well, I was gonna do some breakdowns. If anybody wants to just do a quick live breakdown, I wanted to do, break down Contours Bitter Fights. Yeah, thanks. I'm actually gonna release Contour at some point on YouTube. I was thinking of doing just a quick breakdown of the, what was it? I actually made a list here. So I was talking about techniques in the video and this idea of using, you know, what was once kind of a ritualized instrument, and then using it for a secular purpose. And one example would be like the Jason Bourne pen fight, right? And everybody knows that fight, but that's sort of like in line with what we're talking about. But with kind of American style techniques, it's less about trying to show the beauty of the original instrument, right? Like the Magnificent Butcher calligraphy scene, for example, very beautiful movement, and it's about the beauty of calligraphy, right? See if I can pull it up. My search has not been working very well. But if we don't have any more questions, the next episode is probably not going to be out for another few weeks. I would still like to do one of these next time. And you know, maybe do some more live breakdowns as well. And that one will be about opera. In fact, maybe... Yeah, I don't know. What happened to it? I'm trying to find this clip. Oh, I know. There we go. Stop. There we go. Sorry, technical difficulties. Give me 1 second here. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so one of these great aesthetic fight, one of these great like techniques fights is Dirty Ho, which is his last name is Hall. It's not Ho. Lots of techniques in this movie. Is that Yun Shun Yi? No, that's Wang Lung Wei and Gordon Liu. But here we go. All right, here we go. We'll pull up the Magnificent Butcher calligraphy fight. Trying to anyway. Sorry about this. Let's see. Samo. There it is. Li Hui Sang is the villain. Right, which like from a practical perspective, of course this fight makes no sense. So I mean, when you just look at it from perspective of like, oh, let's just show the value of calligraphy and the techniques involved in using a brush for combat, and then he goes into just doing calligraphy with both brushes, right? This is again like, this is a part of the reason that we need to understand Hong Kong action from this more ritual and traditional viewpoint, and not from a very practical viewpoint for the most part. Right? That's not to say it never happened. Samo was the one that really introduced a lot of practicality because he was bringing in kickboxers, and he would just fight them at their own game. But in general, though, I mean, this is a Yuen Ping film, and this film is highly operatic in that sense. Our fight scenes is LA. Our fight scenes being more intertwined with the choreography to the northern style. Yeah, I mean, Kwan Tak Ying he's a southern performer, but whenever you see him doubled, like if you were to look at the Dreadnought fight, for example, let's see if we can pull that up. Let's see. Let me find Dreadnought. There it is. So whenever Kwantai King is being doubled, I think he was doubled by like one of Yumo Ping's brothers, and does very northern style movements because they were trained by their father, and they were trained in a let's watch the end fight real quick. Let's see. Oh, this is a little bit too late in it. Let's see. Yeah, this is too late in it. Now I want the fight with Philip Coe. And my search is like not working today. Let's see. Maybe I can just go into here. Dreadnought. Here we go. Here we go. So Kwantai King. So the double is very long, right? That's Philip Coe, the villain. He's one of the greatest. Very northern, right? Right there. The double in red. But then when it cuts to Kwantai King, his movements are going to be a little bit more punctuated. Double again here. Right here. Like that. That kind of movement right there is like, that's very sudden. Yeah, right there. There's the practicality for you. I think if the double had done that, it would have been like more stylish. But this, for him, it's like, it's not stylish at all. It's just, it's like disciplining a kid. Another person, 81. Don't you think both scenes show how they're connected? Plugged in, testing each other, touching hands and responding, showing their skill to each other as to who's better. Yeah, and like the techniques kind of allows you to do that with dialogue and with you're kind of telling a story through dialogue as they're doing this. And yeah, those are reasons why like that kind of stuff is kind of difficult in a purely American style. But They Live is an example of a fight where there's a story that's told through the entire fight, and it's done, and the fight is choreographed in a very, it's almost a wrestling kind of way, where one person, it's not really a back and forth. Let me find it. Let me pull it up real quick. They Live. And the fight is told much more, like you said, it's like a one-up kind of showcase. And but yeah, it seems like in American fights, it's less about that. It's more about a character and less about the two jockeying for position. Not to say that you can't do it, but it is kind of a different movement style that allows you to do these kind of shows of hierarchy, right? Plus, in American cinema, we don't really have hierarchy the way that they have hierarchy in Europe, China, and Japan. It's a little bit different. Our hierarchy is very kind of like inverted a lot of the time. It's more about movement and skill, and less about proper etiquette. Right? So much of these Chinese fights, what makes them so great is that there's etiquette involved, right? Like, and there's sort of this implied hierarchy between the two, and that's always trying to be, and they're always trying to push that. And of course, like the more righteous one is going to win out at the end. I would love to get this They Live fight. Why can't it just work? Here it is. Long fight. So I'll get a copyright strike, but the whole movie is really fun. In fact, the movie is a movie that you couldn't do anymore. Where, like, I think it was 1988, where Roddy Piper finds a pair of sunglasses. He puts them on. He sees who the aliens are in the city, right? And the aliens are looking at him like, "What are you looking at?" And he takes the sunglasses off, and they go back to normal. He puts them back on. He sees who the aliens are. He also sees all the subliminal messaging. And then the natural sort of response is to go get a machine gun and start killing him. Like, you could not do this today. There's just no way. But back then, it's like, oh yeah, of course. If there were aliens, you would just start shooting them. So it's kind of a time capsule. It's a fantastic movie. LA is saying, so a lot of the northern style appeared as if a lot of movies are being formed like a triangle, considering how straight. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know like how important the actual shapes are in terms of like where the ideas come from, right? Because you are just trying to kind of make geometry when you're doing these northern style martial art films. And when I say northern style, it is sort of the Hong Kong style, like, because really a lot of the Hong Kong films that we love are made by southern guys who trained in Beijing Opera, in Hong Kong, right, or in that area. And so they were taking a sort of northern aesthetic, and a lot of the northern aesthetic really came down to Hong Kong just because people demanded it. So the Chinese Cantonese opera in the late 1800s, they realized that whenever a Beijing opera performer would come in and perform like the Guan Yu, or where they would perform the wusheng role, the martial art role, whenever a northerner would play it, the movements were very big and fluid, and the southerner tended to be very kind of like small and probably more realistic, maybe a little bit more Born Identity like, right? And people just really liked the northern style, and so the theater managers started bringing in more northern actors into the South, and people from guys like Mei Long Fa. I think it was Mei Long Fa. I'm still trying to get like the names right with opera, who was like the female impersonator, and these very kind of like long movements that were very articulated and required a great amount of skill, because you sort of have to articulate different parts of your body at different times and in different ways. And I think it was Sergei Eisenstein who said that when he saw a Beijing opera performance, it was like he was watching bones, like a skeleton, come apart and reassemble itself over and over and over. And that's how a Beijing opera performer could sort of articulate their movements. And that's actually an incredible skill. And that lends itself to a really high level of movement language. And when you combine that in the South, where you have this like, where you're breaking movement apart into its grammar essentially, and then you add in this sort of like port city where all these martial artists in the world are coming in. You have kickboxing, you've got savate, you've got these Americans, you have boxing coming in, right? You combine the articulation with real combat, and you get Samo, you get Lao Gaodong, right? You get these guys that are like, okay, well, let's take the aesthetic of the North and combine it with the practicality of the South and the rawness, and that's how you get this sort of Hong Kong flavor. And yeah, that's very much because of the huge amount of Beijing opera influence in the South. Another person saying, the gaps are painfully obvious as opposed to sticking your hands. I appreciate the different styles, but I love the subtle skill expressed through the touching hands. Yeah, that's like, it's really hard. It's incredibly. You still watch Prodigal Son by Samo, and you realize like nobody can do that. Nobody has done that since. Nobody can do that. That's just an incredible skill to be able to pull that off. And of course, he reinvented it with Ip Man again. So, I mean, if that's your jam, man, like, I know why. See, Ala Moraine is saying, I can see and understand the trade-off between Hong Kong and other as much as one can without being a martial artist, but my compliment stands. Hong Kong can't even do Hong Kong like you do now. I mean, thank you. I think a lot of the Hong Kong guys, though, just like, it probably, I think that, well, first of all, the Hong Kong style does not really pull in the receipts that it used to, and that's just, and maybe that's changing, everything everywhere all at once. It's like kind of it's a little bit of a revival of the Hong Kong style, which is cool. Martial Club did that. And it's also, it's what Brad Allen was doing before he died. He was kind of bringing the Hong Kong style to Kingsman, and that, and he was showing that that's like a marketable style. And it's too bad that he passed, but he did show that it's possible. So if there's money to be had there, and if you can sell tickets with that, then it's just a matter of who are you going to convince to produce your film. And if you want to do a kung fu movie, how are you going to do it, right? So everybody always brings up The Raid. The raid was $1 million. They had 90 days to shoot it. They did it in Indonesia. And they had a really smart distribution plan, you know. And that's not a feel-good movie. So it kind of, you know, it's sort of hit that note of like danger and you know, violence that everybody loves, combined with that like somewhat operatic kind of movement, which is, you know, Indonesian silat. And a lot of silat performances, when you watch them, they're very dance-like. They're very choreographed. It's not like Muay Thai. Muay Thai's got like choreographed routines as well, and a lot of that goes right into the Muay Thai movies that, you know, Pana was doing. But then, you know, Muay Thai's also got its actual sparring element, and Silat doesn't. You know, Silat goes more in the direction of the cooperative, even though its techniques are technically deadlier. But you can't really spar with those, right? You can't really spar with karambits very well. I don't know why I was talking about that. Oh, I know. It's because like why this style doesn't really happen anymore. And I mean, there's probably other like, you know, financial factors in Hong Kong and China. The Hong Kong handover too. Like you know, a lot of those. I don't know. It's just a different era. I don't know how else to explain it. Safety also. You know what it is too. A lot of Hong Kong guys came to America and realized how safe things are in America compared to what they were doing in Hong Kong. And they went back to Hong Kong and probably just demanded higher safety standards, and that's expensive. You know, you don't get as many days. You're not gonna have the balls out stuff that you had in the 80s because I don't know if they knew better in a certain way. Because once they came to the States, they realized like, wait a minute, what are we doing? So I appreciate the compliment, but you know, being realistic about it, it's difficult to make that work unless it's the right package, right? Which we're still going to try and do with Violent Rhythm. It is that style, but it is musical at its heart. It is a musical movie. It's not a musical like High School Musical or like Singing in the Rain where they break out in song and dance. The music is a part of the scene. So it's not like cheesy. Hopefully. Let's see. What else? Let's see. LA saying, what's your take on Lim Ching Ying and Frankie Chan fight from Prodigal Son? Oh yeah, this is like genius fight. I don't know, what can I say? Like, how do I even what part of the thing about that fight, that's a good one to break down real quick. Part of the thing about that fight is there are some things in that fight, like the editing is also really good in that fight, as anything with Samo. Has great editing. I'm having a hard time doing the live breakdowns. I might not do them today. We'll see. But there's some kind of the undercranking probably helped. You know, that fight's probably shot at 20 at times, I'm guessing, which is fast. That's like let's see, 4 divided by 20. It's 4 frames out of 24. So what's that, like almost 10%? Almost 10% speed up. Okay, what do you think of Sakura, the new Donnie Yen movie? And there's some cool wire gags in that movie. I haven't seen the whole movie, but I've seen some action from it, and they're doing some really interesting wire stuff. I imagine that took a long time. So I'm excited to see the movie though. That's all I've seen. Gotta throw this out there too. Has Stahelski contacted you about appearing in a John Wick movie at all? We've had Bernhardt, Rohian, now Adkins and Zaror. Where's Jacobus's part? No, he hasn't. He hasn't contacted me. I would love to do it. That sounds like a blast. I'm curious to see what they do with Scott Adkins. He's a very interesting character that he's made for it. But like from what I understand too, the way that you know, the way Chad designs action is for the shot, and that's a great combo of like American and Chinese and Japanese style. He actually sort of seems to lean in the Japanese direction. I know he's like a big Japanese architecture buff, and that's why his movies look so good. You know, he's got an eye for that stuff. But he'll fill the frame in a nice way. So shots in John Wick are like paintings. He doesn't use a whole lot of editing. He doesn't solve problems with edits. He'll solve problems with performance. That's a Japanese style. So Ed Khan is in here. What's up? 20 frames per second is too crazy. Hey Ed. 20 can be crazy, but there's a way that you perform it, right? The thing is, like, and I talked about this in the previous episode, like all of us indie, action stunt guys and stunt women, like we were all watching Hong Kong films, and then we would try and move that fast without undercranking. And it was kind of like I remember me and like DL, you and I had a conversation at one point. This is back in like 2002. I can't remember who came up with this novel idea of putting pads under our clothing, but like one of us was really surprised. And we were like, you mean I've been doing falls this whole time without pad? Like I could have just had pads on, and it was just this revelation. And so similarly with undercranking, I think a lot of us just didn't want to do it. I think we knew that we could at some point, but by then we had sort of prided ourselves, I guess, on moving so quickly. Yeah, DL's still doing it without pads. Good man. Keeping the spirit alive. The thing too, if you undercrank, you don't get the you would probably like you'd have to fix the sound because the sound is gonna have the wrong pitch. There's a whole lot of stuff like that. But with 20, you just perform it like it's 20. But then sometimes, like you look at Iron Monkey, and Donnie Yen is performing as if he's shooting a 24 frames per second fight scene, and that's why like his action is almost like comical at times. It makes you wonder if he was trying to like make a statement. Like he's so fast. Like a move happens, and then you just kind of see the recovery pose. TJ, let's see. I feel like martial arts cinema is slowly dying. There's no new Tony Jaa or Iko. Do you feel like someone will replace those guys with that style of violence, or will it go back to more Hong Kong style? Like Tony Jaa's a freak, and he had a really good choreographer and mentor, and the who is now dead. And I think Panna, and I think Panna, I think he was like incredibly instrumental in that. Like that was really like a collaboration with those two. So you get a freak like Tony Jaa who can physically do anything, and a guy like Panna who sees the edit, he sees the frame, he sees the action, and that's why you have that kind of Tony Jaa style of action. And then when there's no more Panna and Tony Jaa movies, like Tony Jaa still makes movies. He's still doing martial art movies, but it's not the same without Panna. So you need, and so it's the same thing with like Sonny Chiba and Hiroyuki Sanada. Same thing with Sammo Hung and Jackie Chan. You have these sort of big brother figures who bring up their little brothers, and those are always the great action films. And I guess in the case of Iko, you kind of have Gareth being the director who sort of brings Iko up. But I think that without a Gareth, then you don't really have a Raid, and you don't have. So you need that cooperation between the big brother, the little brother, the mentor, and the student. You have to have that. Otherwise, it's just you're not really going to have that. So that then begs the question: where are these up and coming stars? Because we keep on hearing there's always like every couple years there's like the next big action star contest. So like they'll have the next John, hopefully not, like the next John Wick, right? You can almost imagine it, right? It's like we're looking for the next John Wick. You come and you show me what you're made of, and there'll be something on there. Maybe they'll shoot paintballs at each other or something, and like a bunch of guys and women will show up, and they'll shoot paintballs against John Wick, and he's against Keanu, and Keanu's gonna pick one, and that person will go and like do one movie that nobody sees, and John Wick will, and then Keanu Reeves will keep doing John Wick 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. That's like really what it is. So if you don't actually have like a mentoring system, you just don't get an Eco. You don't get a Tony Jaa. These next big action star things are usually kind of scams, and they don't really. I don't know. Like maybe somebody can point to like the next big action star actually becoming the next big action star. I'm not sure it ever happened. It seems like most often it's because you have a great mentor. My mentor is Clayton Barber, and without him, you wouldn't have Rope-a-Dope 1 and 2, and you wouldn't have Blindsided. Just an example. And I also have mentors at Santa Monica Studio. Without them, you would not have Super Alloy, because I would not have learned mocap the way that I did. And that's just incredibly important. If we're in this system where we think that everything can just be done by just being your own person, or just kind of like hacking it on your own, it's really hard. You need someone backing you. You need someone who's smarter than you. What can I say? You need someone who can like see broader than you, so that you can perform. Or if you have that broad vision, bring someone up who can then perform, right? And that's how you get those. You need the two. You have to have the two. You have to juxtapose those two things. DL, why do you think Ken Lo had the opportunity to shine in Drunken Master 2, but subsequently has been given the background pieces and no more cool bits? I think Ken Lo is probably just a nice dude. He's just a nice dude. He seems like a very sweet man. Who probably just saw Drunken Master 2 as this awesome opportunity, knocked it out of the park, and then of course he did, dozens of movies after that, and never really was given the same treatment. But I doubt he took that badly. He probably was like, yeah, Drunken Master 2 is one of the greatest things ever, and after that I had a career as a stuntman and really enjoyed that, right? And he's just like. And you can kind of see it in how he acts. He's just like a good character actor now. He's got like great scenes in movies where he barely even fights. I can't remember what it was. He did a cool character. But I remember it was in Killzone, not Killzone. Oh geez, what's it called? The new Raging Fire. I think that's what it's called. He's got a cool role. He doesn't really fight, but he's like, So it's probably personality. Which is funny because Muay Thai is probably hard as nuts, but sometimes those guys are just really sweet. Jay is asking, Jabroni, Creed 3, Michael B. Jordan said he was inspired by Hajime no Ippo and other anime, using speed ramps and internal dialogue. What's your take on directors trying to adapt the anime style to live action? Clayton was talking to me about this before he went and did that movie, and he was like, this is crazy. This is like a crazy action design process. He wants to do this anime. I have no idea what we're gonna go for. And I mentioned like Hajime no Ippo. It's an awesome anime. I think one of those boxing animes is like literally a 90-minute movie that it takes place across the span of one fight. And I haven't seen Creed 3. I'm really looking forward to it though. But I'm interested in seeing how you do that, how you actually pull that off. Go back, rewatch it. Yeah, I should. Because usually anime fights are weird. Because American anime fights are weird because Americans don't like formulate thoughts that way. I don't know how else to say it. Like it's really hard to do an American anime style because we don't think like so much of anime is just like part and parcel to the Japanese style. Cause and effect. Takeshi Kitano movies. Cause, effect. You might not even see the action. You'll see a guy walk up to camera and you'll cut to a guy like on the ground with a bloody nose and you think it's hilarious and you just sort of like put two and two together and it's kind of like a science experiment where you're filling in the gap. A lot of anime works like that. Where you're just sort of like looking at the first shot and then you look at the second shot and you go like, oh shit, he just cut that tree down, and the tree's slowly falling down and he's just holding a pose. A lot of that's Japanese style. I think a lot of that is just like, that's just the reverberations from samurai culture where that stuff was like a day-to-day occurrence. Warfare was just a day-to-day occurrence and people would die. And it's not that people, it's not that, from what I understand, during like the Edo period, I don't think people were walking around with swords very often, the average person. But warfare was such a constant and normal condition that that violence was sort of viewed in that way, especially since, like, again, the center of violence, the capital, it could just kill people for transgressing norms, for transgressing hierarchy, right? And that was just fair game. And so when you have that sort of like if you do this, you die. That's a very cause effect. Maybe that's just like reverberated down through like the standard sort of Japanese action. Rurouni Kenshin is sort of like a change from that, because again, it's, you know, action directed by a guy who was trained in Hong Kong. This is very much about shapes and cooperation. Still has some of that Japanese flavor to it. Sakura, same thing, right? But Kenji is Hong Kong trained, for sure, and everybody loves what he's done. It's very different than like the very cause effect Hong Kong Japanese style. And there's some like American cause effect style action too. And I think like that cause effect style is more in keeping during times when like violence seems more real, and you're probably gonna have less of it during times of peace, or when things are more like late 90s America, right? Perfect example. Like things were pretty, if you want to call it good. There was no, 9/11 hadn't happened yet. Gulf War had been 6 years earlier, and so you have this huge like influx of Hong Kong films and the Hong Kong aesthetic. People just liked watching people move around. They wanted to see the reason for things to happen. And then Bourne Identity is it's not quite like a montage style shooting, but a lot of the Bourne Identity action is you're as a viewer, you're just trying to kind of piece things together, and you're trying to infer what is causing one thing to lead into the next thing. And just as you're sort of like catching that, you're onto the next image. You see a knife. Okay, well, he's pulled out a knife. So that guy got cut. How did he get cut? Oh, that's a pen. Oh, wait a minute. There's like a lot of kind of thinking that is involved there. So I wonder if like Creed is tapping into that. I know it's a boxing movie, and boxing movies are never out of style. But I'll be curious to see how. Maybe you could do that with a war movie. John's saying so much of anime action derives from manga source material, which is a still medium driven by VO. Yeah, but so does Marvel, right? Like Marvel is a lot of that's from still material, and they're always trying to find a movement language that fits the source material to some extent, but it still has to be American. So there is this kind of like American posy style of movement, but it's very character driven. It's not posing mid-fight. It's like the pose is after the impact. The pose is on the landing. The posing is not like shapes fighting like this. It's much less about that. So, anyway. Hey, M. Martinez, thank you. Thanks for the video and your efforts. Appreciate it. This is a joy doing these. So, and I appreciate that people are hanging out and just asking questions. This is a lot of fun. Tomas. I assume it's Tomas because you have a Z at the end of your name. Do you think the swashbuckling fencing style, can ever return to the big screen? You'd think the Pirates of the Caribbean would start a big pirate renaissance, but it basically didn't. I think, where is it? I have a book. Of course I have a book. Oh, we'll find it some other time. But where did I put it? There it is. I think I mentioned this last time. This is Stage Combat Swordplay from Shakespeare to Present. Shakespeare is spelled incorrectly on the cover for some reason. And it might have been like a print-on-demand book. That notwithstanding, this is a fantastic book about fencing in theater through like the 16th century onward. And he kind of breaks down like whether people understood fencing that they were watching, right? Like did the audience understand the fencing that they were watching? Did the people who were fencing know how to fence? Did the people who were writing the fencing in these plays, did they understand fencing? He breaks all that stuff down, and it's fascinating. Italy, didn't really like showing fencing on stage. Like fencing would be referred to, but they wouldn't show it, because in Italy there were a lot of people fencing and a lot of people dying from fencing in the streets. There would be bloodbaths, so it was almost taboo. But in England, they were very open about fencing on stage, and it would be very violent sometimes. In France, they had a taboo apparently where like you couldn't die. So, but like there was one scene that was written where the guy had to die, and so he dies in the arms, and like he's breaking a taboo by you're breaking a taboo by having somebody die from a fencing duel on stage. But then just as the curtain's about to go down, he puts his arm up in the air just to show that he's alive, and then the curtain drops. So fencing has this amazing tradition in Europe, but not really in America, because by the time you have Americans coming over, or you have Europeans coming over to colonize North America, you like pistol dueling was essentially the only way that you were going to have a duel. There were very few fencing duels in the States. I know that they happened, but like there's just not really a tradition of it, because like what was the first fencing school in America? I don't know if anybody really cares, right? Why fence? Why not just pull out a gun? Same kind of situation as China, right? So you do have kind of a history of swashbuckling, and great swashbuckling films in America, directed by Europeans, sometimes like Three Musketeers, for example. The one with Robert York has some amazing fights, and of course like Princess Bride probably being like one of the last ones, and Rob Roy. And I think like those, that stuff was probably really big on the East Coast, but by and large, like American theater didn't really like excel in fencing. A lot of it was brought in by like French and Italian fencing coaches. And so Americans don't really like understand fencing aside from pirate stories, right? We can kind of understand fencing in the context of pirates. Can't quite contemplate it in terms of the duel. Yeah, I know Kubrick did his film Barry whatever it was called, and also The Duelists, Ridley Scott, amazing film. But I think nowadays, if you just have a fencing fight, you can't just have a fencing fight. Star Wars has some fencing fights, Star Wars 4, 5, and 6. Great fencing fights, and like the simplest one is the best one in my opinion. It's from Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, and that is just a very very basic fencing fight. It's all story. But I think nowadays you have to have almost like you almost have to have a disaster movie happening at the same time. Like Star Wars 3, they have this incredibly intricate sword fight on a moving platform on a lava bed. And I think that fight would not have gotten past the producer if it wasn't on a platform on a lava bed. So it has to have like incredibly high production value. So you have to have an incredibly big production, like Pirates of the Caribbean. And if you don't have that, then probably the old school producers are not really going to push it. Now I will plug something. Gubarik is working on a fencing film that is really fun, and he put a lot of thought into the character. So I think that it's always possible. I mean, like, always start on the indie level. If you think that it can make a comeback, then like do one, and try and find it. So fencing fights were, I think that's like one of our greatest treasures in America. But I think that sometimes producers are worried that it's not going to connect to the audience. So you have to connect in other ways. Make it a comedy. Make it a horror. Make it something like that, right? If you just do like a straight fencing film, it's probably not gonna work out. And as we all know nowadays, making a comedy at a high level at a big studio is almost impossible. So do it at the indie level, like Gedali did. Let's see. We have a compliment. Ala Marino. Just want to throw a compliment out there. A bit of fancy. Love your work, and I love your videos. You're the close. Oh, sorry, I already read that one. Well, thank you again. Another person, 81. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Been a fan for a long time. The Kictionary is very humbling, incredible talent, and the joy from Kratos. I wish you further success. Thank you. The Kictionary probably took me 2 years because I would just do like one kick a week and I would just drill it. I'd drill it so hard, and I think that if you asked me to do half of those kicks now, I'd probably struggle just as hard as I did back then. But I think that the value of the Pictionary was that it helped me to kind of systematize movement for mocap, because when you look at the curriculum for kicks, it all kind of like fits into it all kind of fits into a table, right? There are really 8 kicks, and maybe 2 more depending on how you look at it. You can almost make like a Bagua diagram, like 8 trigrams out of it. Front kick, round kick, side kick, twist kick, inside crescent, outside crescent, axe, and hook. And that's just sort of all the angles. And then maybe however you swing it, you might be able to do the inside hook, which is this like weird thing that they do in Southeast Asia. And then maybe the like inverted kind of like the kick where you sort of like push your foot out like this. You might be able to add those 2. But basically you have those 8 kicks. And Huang Zheng Li does those in the Art of High Impact Kicking. And so every one of those has a front leg version and a back leg version, a stepping version and a back version and a spinning version, 360 front, 360 back, jump front, jump back. And they vary in like from like almost impossible to extremely easy. But when you systematize movement like that, it kind of helps you then systematize it for combat systems in games, for example. And we do that all the time here. And it helps you with coming up with combos in mocap, and now I'm giving mocap advice, not that anybody asked for it. But whenever you do motion capture for combat systems, they're going to ask you to make a combo. They always ask you, and then they'll show you like vidref. And if you can systematize that in your head, it's like, you know, uppercut. Filipino Eskrima does this too. They just have 1 through 8 and a stab. Chambara has it 1 through 8 and a stab. Then it just makes it easier for you to move and make a movement language out of it. There, I brought it all back to movement language. Hola, would you do a commentary track on the Pictionary? Maybe break down some of the weirder ones or the ones that you took. That's an interesting idea. I have to think about that. It'd be a long commentary. I'm sure a lot of them I've forgotten even what I was thinking when I came up with them. Like a lot of it at the time was like I would get an idea from a video game, and then I would just try and find a way to perform that, and then I would do a stepping variety, twisting variety, and all that. So, but then some of them too, like the way that I named some of them was just based on pop culture references. So yeah, I'd be totally down to do that. It'd be fun. John, is there a kick trick you feel like you can say you invented? I did call one the dope sweep, which is a kip up, which with one leg out, and then that goes into a back sweep. I feel like I invented that. I don't think anybody else has done that. Pete, I bet Pete would know if I invented a kick. Pete knows me better than I know myself. Yeah, from Rope It Up too. Yeah, that was the one at the end. I don't know. I've probably done like varieties on stuff that nobody else has done, but in terms of like a raw movement that nobody else has done, I don't know. But the Pictionary, D.L. McD has a kick in there that he invented. I named it after him. It's quite good. Let's see. We got the Storm Virgil. Speaking of video games, took me years later. Eric was in the Mortal Kombat live action web series. Yes, that was me. I did a podcast about that recently. I'll put it on the YouTube. I'll make like a community post when that comes out. So I talk a lot in depth about that, and there were some funny stories from that shoot. Like I caught on fire at one point because they were trying to do a fireball blast. So Liu Kang shoots me in the back with a fireball, and so they decided to like put like this burning ember, some kind of substance. It might have been magnesium for all I know. And they put it on my back, and they said action. They lit it, and and then I fell to the ground, and then they VFX'd the fireball later. But then like as I'm laying on the ground, it's burning me. It's actually burned through my jacket, and Casper's the one that calls it out. He says, "Hey, he's on fire." Anyway, they came and put me out. So Casper saved my life at least once in that. He's a good dude. I've got a lot of good things to say about him, and I talk about it in that podcast. So, LA, are you keeping with more indie action people or films still? I mean, my heart is in indie action and mocap, because I love doing gameplay capture. and my heart is not in it for the games themselves. It's because I love working with people, and I love learning how to move. So there's sort of like two loves there. The indie crowd, I stay in contact with them. I've interviewed a bunch of these guys too, and women as well. And I'm using small clips in these episodes, but I have entire like 2-hour interviews with these people. You know, Scott Adkins, Isaac Florentine, JJ, Vlad, Manny, Takla, Guy, a lot of very talented performers and people that came from the indie world. And and I think that that's important to maintain. You know, I think I'm kind of a punk rocker in a way, and I like trying new stuff. Sometimes it bites me in the butt and it's a waste of time. Other times it's something nobody else has done. It just depends on which thing it is. So nowadays it's more mocap. But when we start getting into the productions again, when we start doing violent rhythm, we have a few other things too that we want to start doing. But right now we're just trying to get the studio afloat, right? And just trying to keep the studio going at an even keel. We just hired a bunch of people, and we're trying to keep things going here. And so that's first priority. And then once we get that going, we could jump right back into doing productions. So, yeah, man, I love working with you guys too. It's funny because 20 years ago, we used to just kind of get together and shoot stuff. It was just for the sake of doing it, and it was the camaraderie. It was the shared language, right? Jay, we talked about that a lot in your episode. And I'll probably edit these as well into podcast form at some point, release them. I have like 35 of them. So there's a lot of great info in there. John is saying if the forum was still around, keeping track of people's work would be easier. I know. That was the thing with like social media. It just sort of, I don't know if it negated the forum, but it just sucked away everybody's energy, including mine, from the forum. It was like, why would I post a video in two places? I'll just post it. No. And it wasn't like the forum was still doing really well during MySpace, if anybody remembers that. Forum was still, killing it back then. And when YouTube came around, it was like, great, now we can easily host, and we just post the link on the forum. John is sort of our like in-house, it's not exactly in-house, but he's sort of like our forum expert. He sort of knows the history of it. Well, we're going to probably put together a documentary at some point. He just shared his treasure trove of old indie action, like MPEG files. And so I've got all the ones that he has. So if anybody else has more, by the way, like please contact us or just leave a comment and let us know, so that there might be some like old stuff that is just not available anymore. Because we would just do this stuff for fun. But then when social media came around, it was like too much of a distraction. When I say social media, I mean like Facebook. And then it kind of became a question of like, well, do I post it at the forum or do I do it on Facebook? And then the forum just started going down. Plus, having your own forum, it's difficult. You got to pay for the server fees. You got to deal with hackers. And there's always spam on there. Just like every morning, because I had to approve. It got to the point where I had to approve every post, and it got to the point where like it was an old forum, right? And so there would be this exclamation point. It's like click that and like brace myself. It's like 1,322 new messages, and I would just have to look through 1,300 messages to find the 3 that were made by people, and I just delete the rest of them. And I was like, man, this is not working. So that's just, the forums were nice though, because like you can actually have a culture on a forum. I don't know if you can get that same kind of culture from a social media group. Definitely can't get it from Twitter. There's no culture on Twitter. Like, I guess you kind of get cultures within a person's profile, but then everybody's trying to get their own culture in their profile. So is that really culture? You can get it in Facebook groups. That was actually the only reason I didn't want to leave Facebook. but in terms of developing culture on social media now, like how do you even make a culture anymore? It's really hard to do. You have to kind of do it outside of social media now, I think. So it's bittersweet, but I think it's true. Unless you guys have an opinion about like the state of culture. Yeah, PHPVB was a nightmare. Like it was open source, so anybody could download it and find all the exploits, and they would find them. And our site got hacked more than once. Dario is in the chat. He was my webmaster for years and worked for free. Thank you, Dario. I'm forever indebted to you. And like the number of times that the site would just be down, or somebody would say like, hey man, like I went to your site and I got a virus, and then Google unlisted the website. It's like, now your site's a security hazard. It's like, oh my gosh, forget it. We're done. We're done. You know, hacking is just like mold on bread, where like at some point it just hits you. It's just gonna hit you. It's just out there. It's waiting to find bread, and you're the bread that it finds. You just don't want to be that guy. So I ended up having to switch over to a new web server, and then the forum was like, well, let's just get rid of it. It's unfortunate. Yeah, I see that with spammers targeting YouTube channel comments. Like you get that with like people saying, yeah, message me on Telegram to get your prize and stuff, and all that's nonsense. You just gotta be careful about that stuff. But at least the videos are still up, you know, like that doesn't get affected. I'm curious though what ChatGPT is going to be doing with all this. Like at some point, like, I know that ChatGPT, in case you haven't heard of it, you can ask it anything, it'll give you an answer, unless it's like inappropriate or if you're trying to swindle somebody. And you can ask it to code for you. And if you have like an API, like a YouTube API that you want to code for, like ChatGPT might be able to help you find an exploit within the API, and then you can target somebody. So it's probably like coming to that point where you're just going to have a critical mass of people figuring out exploits to every API in the world and using ChatGPT to find those exploits and using them to get who knows what. So just be careful. Take a couple more questions. The Storm Virgil Eric. Your name is the Storm Virgil. Okay, got it. Eric, do you think you're getting old or still nimble? I don't know. Am I nimble? I don't know if I'm nimble anymore. I'm not exactly nimble. Not exactly nimble. Definitely getting old. I have way more gray hair than I did yesterday. And like all of this is gray now. This is gray. This is gray. And I don't really feel old. I haven't gained weight. I'm still pretty like lean. I think that the main things now are neck from reactions. That's the main thing. And just making sure you get enough sleep. Like I used to be able to pull off, like getting 4 hours of sleep in a night, and I could kind of like hack it through the next day, and I just can't do that anymore. Also, you have to be careful. I'll take a shower and I'll dry my hair, but if I dry my hair too hard, I'll hurt my neck again. It's pathetic, but that's But look, there's a good side to getting old, which is that you should have a better sense of humor about things, because you're going to encounter horrific things in your life that put a lot of things in context, and you stop worrying so much about the smaller things, and you can still be sensitive to those things for other people who are experiencing them, but in your own life it just becomes a little bit easier to get over those things. So like failures, like somebody pointing out that you had a booger on your mustache for the entire podcast, you laugh that off. You should when you get older, unless you're trying to be permanently young, and then you're screwed. So don't do that. Tomahawk, have you done the flash kick on someone? I can't find the video. On someone? You like off of someone's chest? No, I would never do that. I'd fall on my head and hurt my neck. And did you learn Shaolin Kung Fu in America or China? Or the real American Shaolin? Never learned Shaolin Kung Fu. But the Las Vegas Shaolin school here that I profiled in the video is Lohan Shaolin. So if you want to look them up, they're pretty cool. They helped me put the video together. Lance sat with me for hours, took the time in the morning to do a little bit of a martial art demo too, and give me the whole background of his school. Boxillum is, like they got a cool lineage. So a lot of what I talked about in the video about like lineage and animal totems and all this, it's controversial because it does sort of like it does potentially throw into doubt like the lineage of a school. It's not my intention to do that because I understand that lineage and legitimacy are really important. But and like when I say that, is it possible for an animal style to have been to have originated within some kind of like totem clan system? That doesn't mean that happened 100 years ago. That could mean that it happened 2,500 years ago, right? And that because there are families that go back really far in China, like family last names are like regionally located, and so when you have, and that probably means that is patrilineal descent, and animal systems also have patrilineal descent systems. There might have been some overlap before the last name system. It might have been an animal system in some of these places, and then before that it would have been matrilineal, where there's much more cross-pollination. That's how you get Bagua and these like two-system marriages. I also think that the Shaolin, there's like you put your arms on the side of the colander, or the cauldron at the end, and it burns the two animals. I think it's like a dragon and a tiger into your arms. That might also be like a two clan system meeting together. I just think that every other explanation is too mythical, and not that the kinship angle is the only angle, but that it's like at least grounded in something that's real. And like there's another way you could approach it economically. You could approach it from purely from a geology standpoint, right? There's a lot of ways that you could approach this, but I think that it's important to at least ask, like, if they're saying that the lineage came from, this person was, like studied a tiger and moved like a tiger, and then and he became a very strong warrior. Like, it is important to kind of question whether or not that person really learned from a tiger, or if the tiger in question was his father, who was a tiger clan member, right? And then the actual violence that was backing this clan was like a militia of some kind, as was the case all through China. So there's a lot of speculation in the hypothesis, obviously, but I think that it's more plausible than people simply being inspired by animals, because that seems to be a very 20th century retelling of a martial arts system, where somebody was like very inspired by watching an animal and then like learned it. I think that's a very 20th century way of thinking, which is again why I recommend you read old books, because when you read a book from the turn of the century, the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, you can kind of learn to think like someone from the 19th century, and they would understand people in China from the 19th century as well. Getting old doesn't stop Donnie Yen, so being 41. Yeah, Donnie's 59. That's crazy. But he's like Donnie Yen. He's different. He's a different kind of specimen. My mentor Clayton's like that too. I remember when I met him, he was 41 when I first met him, and he did a 900 in front of me. I'm 41 thinking, like, would I be able to do a 900 right now? At 41? Like, so some people are made of different stuff. And yeah, Raging Fire it's got some great action in it. He's extremely physical in that movie, so. $5 from Brian. Thank you. Rope-a-dope 3, please. I know, everybody asks for Rope-a-dope 3. The question is always, like, how do I, because I'm not going to cut my beard. So, how then do we do a Rope-a-dope sequel with where the dope has a beard? This is like the $1 million question. The issue is, you can't have the dope wake up the next day and have a beard. It just doesn't make sense. So something has to have happened, where, I don't know. Maybe there's like a long, maybe the dope manages to not get knocked out for 10 years or something, and he's gone into hiding. I've been playing around with a story like that, and then Dennis wakes up and has to go find the dope, and then the two of them make a new checkpoint so that I can keep the beard. It's really just to justify the beard. So somebody help me out. So, uh, let's see. I think maybe we'll wrap it up soon. Appreciate the questions. Still a lot of people. Hey, Ken's in here. Ken is the villain from Rope-a-Dope 2. So thanks for coming, Ken. We'll talk soon, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, oh, that's an interesting idea. Brian's saying, in all seriousness, maybe the time skips like crazy after the reset, and you wake up 8 years later with the beard. I'd have to explain why, right? Like, we'd have to explain why we suddenly got really old. Like, we could maybe we're just incredibly injured. We're just incredibly old and can't move very well anymore. Yeah, that might be a fun way to do it. Yeah, Stan saying bring back beard off idea. Then I can't cut it. I just can't do it. Like, I'm like religiously opposed to cutting my beard now. And I've been asked by Mocap directors saying, okay, so would you be willing to cut your beard off so we can do facial capture? And I just say no. They say, okay, how much? And I just say no. So sorry, beard stays. It's got to. I'm this guy now. That's what it is. Does the beard get uncomfortable? The only thing that's uncomfortable about this beard, and so no, the short answer is no. There's nothing uncomfortable about a beard this length, because the discomfort happens when the hair first comes out, and what happens is it curls back in and starts touching your skin. That's when the discomfort happens, and that's when people shave. And I always have to tell people, like, wait, you just got to give it a couple weeks, let all those hairs grow, touch the skin, and then continue moving beyond the skin, because the hair is going to do this, right? So it's going to come out of your skin, and it's going to do this, and it's going to go like this, right? And it's going to be pushing on your skin like this, and then eventually it'll get long enough where it just does this again, and then the itching goes away. So if you can wait that out, it's like 2 weeks of itching. If you can wait that out, maybe 3, then it stops itching. Okay, then the second problem is the tangling. Now, some people don't have this problem. Some people don't get a tangled beard. And I don't know, like, what sorcery they're using, but I'd be willing to try it at this point, because, like, the tangles are, they're real. And, yeah, you could cut it, but I don't cut it. So instead I use olive oil in the winter to detangle it. Every time I shower, if you shower and you leave water in your beard, at least mine, in the morning, it does this. And it just sucks up, and it's totally tangled. It looks like this in the morning, and I have to, like, undo all that. So there's some maintenance. Small cost, though. Small price to pay. Dumb question. How old are you? I think I'm 40. Use a hair pick. Yeah, I guess I could. I've never actually talked to people who have, like, very curly hair about this, because I assume it's, like, the same problem. I just don't really talk to anybody about it. I just assume it's, like, a me problem. But it's an idea. Although, like, if I used a beard, yeah, I mean, using my fingers seems fine. What about your food? Yeah, I mean, the only thing, yeah, it does do that. So you develop this technique when you're eating soup, right? You just develop this technique. That's how you eat, right? You go, and then you eat, and then it's done. You do this. Otherwise, it just becomes like part of your martial arts training. There's also a way that you change how you drink. You change how you eat out of a spoon. You can eat you eat from a spoon normally, but if you can turn the spoon upside down, you do that, because there's no hair to brush against down there. Getting into the weeds here, but and the other thing is zippers. You gotta be really careful with zippers. It's like this zipper right here. So if I rub my beard against this, it'll get stuck in it. That hurts. And also, and grappling is kind of out of the question now. It gets really difficult because you just get pinched all the time with it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. That was a lot of fun. That was more of a Q&A and not so much of a breakdown. I'm going to start recording the next episode, Opera and Secret Society Origins, and that'll wrap up the Hong Kong and Chinese style. And then I'll probably do some other breakdowns and other video essays in the meantime. after that, so I can just kind of take a break from this because it's been nonstop research. I've been reading an American history book, which is taking up all of my reading time. But I'm looking forward to getting this third one out and wrapping this up. Thank you all. Talk soon. Oh, and also, I keep on plugging this, but like, join my Telegram channel. I know not many of you use Telegram. In fact, nobody on the Telegram channel actually made a request. It's kind of disappointing. Oh well. All right, maybe don't join it. All right, see you all.